Good afternoon, 大家好. Yeah, Taiwanese style, right? Like I always greet in this way. It's my great pleasure to be at this event. It's been a while since I've actually participated in a North American Taiwanese engineers event. And so I wanted to do something a little bit special for you, mainly because I don't think everyone in the audience is actually a computer scientist. Is that correct? If you're a computer scientist, can you raise your hand? Okay, about 50%, right? So if I do a lot of computer science stuff, you're gonna get bored. So I wanna explain 30 years of computer science history to you and explain how we ended up at this particular moment. And hopefully at the end of it, you might even end up with a couple of startup company ideas. By the way, about a year and a half ago, I was at a similar event. I think it was actually, if I remember correctly, it was in Italy, where I gave away a couple of startup ideas. One of them now is a couple $100 million idea. So just stay tuned a little bit. I want to make you all rich a little bit. Okay. So like any keynote speech, I think it's always really good to kind of look at the past and look at what's going on now, and then kind of look at the future. And then I'm going to divide up my talk in a similar way. Why is that? Because I think if you think about what has happened here in Silicon Valley, and in fact, it's doubly remarkable that we're doing this event at the Computer History Museum, because if you actually have spent time in this building, there's some pretty incredible stuff in this building. In fact, I think maybe nearly 5 or 7 years ago, maybe even 10, Google actually had their annual party here. And we got to play some of the early computer games. So they actually turned on some of the old Pongs and all those old games that were in these mainframes, really running on CRT displays. Some of you who are engineers might remember the word CRT, cathode ray tube technology that's in this building. Now there's another reason why this building is remarkable. For many years, I actually worked at Xerox PARC, where personal computing was invented. And they actually have a Xerox Alto and Xerox Star running, still running in this building if you wanted to ever see it. But why am I connecting to that history? Well, there's two reasons. One is that if you look at the hardware that's actually in this building, you realize how little computation we actually had not that long ago. Just before the personal computing era, the computing capabilities that we have was really quite minimal. And so as a result, we actually did a lot of pre-computation. Now, there's another reason why I'm mentioning the 1970s. I'm not even gonna go that far back into history, is that I was born in the 1970s. Now, in fact, there's a very interesting little fact. I always think that, at least within the engineering community in Taiwan, they kind of know who I am. But there's someone else that's even more famous than I am that I went to middle school with. Her name is Lin Ziling. So how old Lin Ziling is actually how old I am, okay? Like literally went to the same school, Zhongzheng Guozhong in Taipei, in the same year. Looking at how old I am, you now know how well she has preserved herself, right? Absolutely amazing. So if you think about the history of preservation, why we need to look at the past, it's not just because the guys and I guess gals here in the audience like to look at Lin Ziling, but also because when you look at it, you understand how to preserve that history. It's important that you understand what history has brought us to this moment. We did a lot of pre-computation. Now, as it turns out, another interesting artifact that's in this building relates to how Google was founded. Not that far from here, walking distance to Google, right? This is walking distance literally to my office, right? And the reality is that Google, beyond building their first computer using Legos, is that we actually was based upon a lot of concepts that were built up over decades of time on something called information retrieval. Nowadays, we just call it search engine. Now, it turns out you could have gone to graduate school and learned a lot about information retrieval, and the book that you would have used was this book, okay? It was called Introduction to Information Retrieval, and written by 3 authors, Christopher Manning, who's now a professor at Stanford, Prabhakar Raghavan, who ended up being the SVP of search for several years at Google, and he was at Yahoo before that, and Henry Schutze, who was my office mate at Xerox PARC. So you can see the connection of the history. Now, you don't need to go to graduate school. I'm going to tell you that it turns out that there are only a couple major ideas from those 20 years of development of search engines, from about 1995 to about 2015 or so, that you really need to know. That's all you need to know. I'm going to go through graduate school in 5 minutes. The first idea was reverse indexing. Very simple idea, which was the idea that if you open up a book, if you still have paper books, you'll remember that you go to the back of the book and you say, oh, the word biological weapon occurs on page 145. That's a reverse index. It tells you which words, what concepts occurs on what page. That's what a search engine is. MapReduce, again, not invented not too far from here, was exactly designed to do this computation very, very quickly using parallel computers. That's why we were building all these data centers and all these very large machines for a very long time at Google. The second idea that you needed to understand was something called vector space model. How many of you have heard of what a vector space model is? Okay, so like about 50%. Again, I'm going to explain it very simply. The vector space model, the idea was you simply count up how many times that word occurs in a page or in a chapter or in a book, okay? And the more often, for example, the words biological weapon is referred to, the more likely that document is about biological weapons, right? So you use a vector to represent how often those words occur in the document, the frequency of it, and you use this to do similarity computation. You can say, oh, this document, biological weapon occurs 10 times. In this other book, it appears 100 times. Well, the document that has it with 100 times is clearly more relevant to the concept of biological weapon, right? Than the one that has only 10 times. And it turns out that you can put them in vector space, meaning that you use linear algebra, and you use the angles between these vectors to calculate similarity. That's the basic concept and information retrieval. Now, it turns out that I spent multiple years in graduate school studying these ideas. And in 1992, my PhD advisor came to me and said, Ed, I got an idea. And I'm going to tell you my life's second big mistake. The first big mistake you already know about, which was Lin Ziling was my classmate, and I didn't do anything about it. There's rumor that she had a 暗恋对象 in 国中, in middle school. I still have not found out who that person is. I'm kind of hoping that it's me, but clearly it's already missed my chance. But my second biggest mistake was telling my PhD advisor that he had a stupid idea. The idea was the following. Instead of that vector space model of a document with the frequency of the words, we're going to replace that matrix with the idea that a user likes this movie with a certain number, right? And then you use all the vector space arithmetic, cosine similarity, dot product, and all that stuff to calculate similarity between users, and then we use this similarity to recommend items for you. Now, this is the only equation I'm going to show you in the entire talk, so don't freak out. I've been told that every time you show an equation, half the room goes to sleep. So stay with me, okay? This is the only equation I'm going to show because it explains the mathematical concept I want you to understand about machine learning if you have never taken a machine learning class. And the concept is the following. We're going to calculate a loss, meaning that how wrong the model is, by a simple equation of a summation. The summation is the sum of the differences between a real rating, small r, in a particular part of the matrix ij, minus the model m, the model's prediction of that particular entry ij. And the model is parameterized by a bunch of parameters that we call theta. Okay, that's all there is. R minus m, meaning the real rating minus the prediction. I'm going to square that because hopefully you took statistics in school. We often use square of losses as a way to understand how wrong we are in statistics, okay? So all I'm going to do is sum up all the places where my prediction was wrong, and I'm going to square those differences. And I'm going to minimize this loss in order to build my model. I'm going to make my model as accurate to the real rating as possible, okay? That was the idea. That was the whole idea. I told John this was a stupid idea. Why? Because vector space model by 1992 was already a very well-known concept in information retrieval. So I don't want to deal with it. I went on to do a computer graphics PhD thesis, visualization thesis. That ended up being pretty well cited. I won a 20-year test of time award for the work. But still, this paper ended up, at this point, someone should look it up on Google Scholar, published in 1994, I think cited more than 20,000 times at this point. Okay, and I'll explain why this is really important in a second. And why am I explaining all these concepts around information retrieval? Well, if you think about it, everything in the internet right now is driven by these two systems, recommendation and information retrieval, or search engines, right? Google has news and search. YouTube has YouTube search and recommendations. What else? Instagram, recommendation, search. TikTok, recommendation, search. Airbnb, recommendation, search. Yelp, recommendation, search. How many of you are single? Any single? Oh, there's one guy who raised his hand very, very quickly. He's like, please look for me afterwards if you're a single lady, right? Tinder. OkCupid. What is it? Recommendation, search. Right? True enough. Okay. So if you think about this, the internet ecosystem is completely driven by these two systems right now. This whole history of 20 years of development, from roughly about 1990 or so to about 2015, everything was driven by these two systems at this point. So much so that you start to wonder, why do we build it this way? Well, it has to do with the fact that we process information in a linear fashion, the fact that we have screens, right? With screens, you want to process information in a sequential way. How important this is that it gave rise to extremely large data centers where all we do is ranking. You know what ranking is? Ranking is sorting. That's all. If you have taken a computer science class, the very first class you learn, what do you learn? Sorting, bubble sort. Then you learn merge sort, then you learn quick sort, then you learn blah, 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 blah. Later on, we actually end up using neural networks to do the sort. So much so that we ended up getting more compute just so that we can do sorting better. The entire internet industry at this point, you know how much of it is driven by sorting? Google search, $200 billion. YouTube, $50 billion. Facebook, $130, $160 billion. TikTok, $130 billion. Do I need to keep going? Right? If you add up all that, what happens? 500 billion or more, probably close to $1 trillion annually is driven by ranking systems. That's why we need to build these giant supercomputers. And all they do is sort. Every day you use a recommendation system. If you use YouTube, my team has improved YouTube recommendation by 17% or more. You're using the research results from my research team. And we use computers like this. This is the first generation of TPUs that we built at Google, like close to, not quite 10 years ago, maybe almost exactly 10 years ago at this point. You know, this is so important where the majority of my work for the first 10 years when I was at Google was improving these ranking systems. My team has actually contributed to more than $10 billion annually at Google, just simply by improving the sorting capabilities, personalization, using neural networks. And I can give a whole afternoon lecture just on how do we do it. But you're not here to listen to that. Okay? I can do it if you want it. Anyone want me to do it? No, I mean, just joking. You'll get bored. But I want to summarize 20 years of innovation that if you think about it, if you had invested at all in 1992, as I mentioned when my advisor came to me, or in 1999, when Google was founded. Actually, more accurately, it was founded in 1989 in September of 1989. Sorry, 1998. Reverse the two numbers. So those 20 years or so, 20 to 25 years or so, these three ideas turn out to be absolutely incredible for driving the internet industry. It is amazing if you think about it, that Taiwan ended up actually building a lot of the hardware around being able to help companies do this, but never participated really in the software revolution that was happening between the 1990s to even to some extent now. And so when we think about AI, we want to think about how we shouldn't miss the next boat that's happening here. And that's why I want to explain a little bit about what's going on next, currently. Well, more like the current part of this is about the next 10 years. What happened between 2015 to about 2025? Exactly 10 years. I want to explain in roughly about, I think, hopefully around 10 minutes of what happened. Okay? The first thing I wanted to explain is something called sequential transduction. How many of you have heard of the word transduction? Please raise your hand. One person, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm talking to engineers, right? And there are only about 6 or 7 hands. Raise your hand and said you have heard of the word transduction. This is pretty amazing to me, actually, because for the rest of you, I might have just made comments that make you feel really dumb. Don't feel bad, because when I first heard the word transduction, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I'm like, what does that mean? So I had a very similar confusion as many of you in the audience right now. For those of you who raised your hand, can anyone blurt out the definition of the word transduction?
Translation of parameters.
Interesting. That's a very, are you an EE engineer? Yeah. Signal processing guy, maybe?
That's what I studied.
Yeah, okay. Anyone have an alternative definition of transduction? Anyone want to try? I don't mind, by the way, whenever I give a lecture, to have your laptops and your phones out, so feel free to do a Google search and cheat, right? This is the whole point, is like, use AI to cheat so that you know what it is about. And I actually forgot to, I should remember this when I woke up this morning. I usually bring a little GIF or something like that for somebody who raises your hand and give me a definition. Does anyone want to try? No? You like you want to try. Yeah.
Okay, I think it has to do with the transformation of information internally to external.
So the transformation of information from internal to external. Now, the internal to external part is not necessary to the definition. But transduction is the idea of taking one energy wave and turning it into another energy wave. This is the original definition of transduction. In fact, you're experiencing transduction right now. A microphone is a transductor. You may have heard of it as being a transducer, but a transducer is something that transducts. What a transducer is, in the case of a microphone, is that it takes the sound that I'm speaking, and that sound wave gets turned into an electrical wave. And that electrical wave now goes through a wireless module in the back here that goes into somewhere in the back over there in the booth, which gets turned into another electrical signal, which then transmit into the speakers. And speakers, another word for speaker is what? A transducer, because what it does is it takes the electrical signal wave and turns it back into sound waves. Okay? So what is a sequential transductor? A sequential transductor is something just like a wave. It's capable of taking quanta of information, turn it into a sequence of symbols, digitally, for example, and then transduces it into another sequence of information. So in fact, I don't know if this is digital. A lot of times these days, these are digital amplifiers and digital transductors and blah, 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 blah. So in fact, these are sequential transductors because they turn my sound, the sound wave, into little pockets of information, just numbers, if you want to think about it that way, and then feed it into a transducer and gets translated into an electrical signal, which goes back into the speakers and then comes back as an amplified sound. Now, the amazing thing about this, about a microphone, is that a lot of times we don't explain it as a transducer. This term never became popular. But it turns out that actually your ear is a transducer as well. In fact, it's very close to the idea I wanted to explain to you, because a ear actually turns sound waves into vibration on your eardrum, which then goes into a kind of electrical signal, which is a neural potential on your neurons, your hearing neurons, which then transmit into your brain. And your brain interprets that signal as concepts and words. That's how I'm able to communicate with you. Isn't that incredible? That this is how it works? And we ended up, as engineers, building a facsimile of exactly this process in hardware, in silica. Absolutely incredible if you think about it. How many of you seen this diagram? Half of you? Have you ever thought why this thing is called a transformer? That's why it's called a transformer. We used to think transformer is something that does what? Well, your nuclear power plant or whatever, your power plant, generate high voltage electricity, which gets sent somewhere here, and then it has to step down from 50,000 volt or whatever it is. And there might be an electrician here in the audience somewhere, and then gets to step down to 240 volts. And then it has to get another transformation into 120 volts, and then you can plug your laptop in. Right? And that transformer is a transducer. All it does is it takes really high voltage and turns it into a low voltage. That's why it's called a transformer. That is a transformer, except it's a transformer of information. Okay? The very first paper on sequential transduction that I think personally that everyone should read is actually not the transformer paper, but rather the original paper on sequence-to-sequence learning. Sequence-to-sequence learning was a paper that was published in 2015, actually more accurately, December 2014, by 3 authors. Ilya Sutskever, who turned out to be OpenAI's chief scientist, Oriol Van Els, which ended up being one of the Gemini co-leads, and the third author, Kwok Lei, who worked in my team. This paper just won the 10-year Test of Time Award at the NeurIPS at the most important machine learning conference in the world right now. It wasn't until two or 3 years later that in 2017, where the transformer paper known as Attention is All You Need was actually published. Okay. So in 2015, we already know that these models are capable of doing this. You put in pixels, it tells you that it's a lion. It turns out in 2015, the best models were able to do this at 3% accuracy, and humans was at 5%. So it was more accurate than humans in identifying what was in the picture. It has super resolution recognition capabilities. Audio, many of you who are old enough to remember that your cell phone could barely recognize your voice in 2010. By 2015, we had some of the best models where you can say, in a noisy bar, call my mom, and it will actually call your mom. The reason for that was because the word error rate before 2015 was horrible. Right? Using neural networks, we were able to do that a lot better. By 2015, what we were also able to do is put in text like, hello, how are you? And ask it to translate into French, and it will say, bonjour, comment allez-vous? Absolutely incredible when I first saw this. What really blew my mind in 2015 was the following. You can put in pixels, and you ask it to generate a caption, and it will say a blue and yellow train traveling down the tracks. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a joke about Taiwanese students' English abilities. We often forget the S at the end of tracks. It gets it perfectly. Not only that, it knows traveling is 2 L's, not 1 L. English is freaking annoying. Right? Spelling is just really hard. You know what else is really amazing, actually? It says blue and yellow train traveling down the track, and not yellow and blue. From a language convention perspective, we tend to say blue and yellow rather than yellow and blue. You know why? CMYK. Cyan comes before yellow, so blue comes before yellow. Just like RGB, we tend to say red and green rather than green and red. When we say green and red, it just sounds a little awkward, right? It's grammatically correct. It's just a language usage convention, if you will, that we tend to say blue and yellow rather than yellow and blue. Okay. So it gets all this right. Now, I'm going to ask you a very private question at this point. This is the reason why I think I might be able to make a couple of millionaires in the audience today if you are not already a millionaire. But maybe you are already a millionaire. How many of you invested, if you had seen this, how many of you in 2015 would agree you should have invested in NVIDIA? Raise your hand. I'm asking a simple question. If you knew about this, would you have invested in NVIDIA in 2015? Please raise your hand. You would have done it, right? Almost all the hands went up. How many of you actually invested more than $1,000 in NVIDIA in 2015? Please raise your hand. 1, 2. 2? 2? More than one?
I sold it in 2016.
Oh, no, you're. I'm not talking to you anymore. Okay, the remaining guy who still had his hands up, you're buying dinner tonight. Here's why he should be buying dinner if he didn't sell in 2016. If you had invested in January 1st of 2015, these papers were published in 2014, December, okay? If you had known this and you invested in January 1st of 2015, NVIDIA stock has gone up 400 times. In other words, $1,000 turns into $400,000. $2,000 turns into $800,000. $3,000 turns, you're getting where I'm going with the math here. $3,000 turns you into a millionaire in 2015 if it held on to it merely for 10 years. You know what I'm really sad about? I knew about this. Just like I knew Lin Zili was really pretty in middle school, and I didn't do anything about it. I didn't do anything about it in 2015. I just told you the third biggest mistake of my life. I can see you're all really enjoying my pain. But I want to mention something that is very important, which is it turns out that if you think about the last two of these, that's why we call it generative AI, because of sequential transduction. Each one of these functions is built by sequentially transducing token by token. So it generates bonjour, comma, it generates the comma. Comment allez-vous, question mark, all as separate tokens in the sequential transduction. That's why it's called generative AI. I'm amazed when I give this talk a few times in Taiwan this year. I asked the press people who are in the audience, how many of you have written 生成式 AI or generative AI? And then I asked, do you know what it means? And all the hands go down. This is what it means. This is why we call it generative AI. It's because of sequential transduction. Okay? This is a very, very important concept. You know why it's so important? Because it turns out that this ability to do this kind of sequential transduction is what enables us to converge functionality into a single model. In the past, in almost all areas of engineering, if we wanted to solve the problem of, say, I'll use a simple example. Let's say you wanted to translate a document from Ukrainian to Japanese and then summarize it. How would you do it? You would either use a Ukrainian summarizer and then translate it, or you would translate it into Japanese and then summarize it using a Japanese summarizer. And then you would verify which one was the better approach, and then you would choose the combination that works the best. This is known as system integration by compositionality. You know what we do now? We put it into a single language model with a single call, and it does it for all 140-some languages that we now do in the Gemini model. You know how incredible that is? In 2015, Google sort of said, we care about 40 languages around the world. 40 times 39 is 1,540 language models that we will have to build. Now we do it with one model. And it summarizes. And it answers questions. And it understands speech. And it understands the world. It's absolutely incredible what is happening. As I mentioned, 2014 to 2017, sequential transduction to transformers. And then we end up with Lambda. Lambda was part of my team at Google, which led to BARD. I was very proud of being a co-author of the chain of thought paper, which introduced the idea of using schematas to decode, using sequential transduction to decode into ideas. And by this year, we use post-training or fine-tuning to be able to actually get the model to solve very difficult math problems. So much so that we actually solve IMO at a gold medal performance level. Okay. So chain of thought, it turns out, was a very key idea in how we instill reasoning into these models. The motivation behind it came from the idea that we should teach these models the way we teach children. You know how we teach children? We don't teach it like how machine learning does it. Machine learning was about the concept of, if you see this input, you should have this output. Chain of thought said, no, we're going to use a different idea. We're going to insert explanations as to why this input is mapped into this output. So let me give you a simple example. For example, let's say you have a very simple math problem, like Roger has 5 tennis balls. He buys 2 cans of tennis ball. Each can has 3 tennis balls. How many tennis balls does he have now? The answer is 11. That's the correct answer, 5 plus 6, right? The cafeteria had 23 apples. They used 20 to make lunch and bought 6 more. How many apples do they have? Back then in 2023, ChatGPT gets it wrong. The answer is not 27. But it turns out that if we insert this little explanation about how to do a math problem like this in blue, this is the little addition into the prompt that we made in the paper. That Roger started with 5 balls, 2 cans of 3 tennis balls, each is 6 tennis balls, so 5 plus 6 is 11, so the answer is 11. That's the explanation. Why the answer is 11. And then the model actually follows that template to solve the new problem. The cafeteria had 23 apples. They used 20, so 23 minus 20 is 3. They bought 6 more, 3 plus 6 is 9. It's not 27, it's 9. 9 is the correct answer. This is how we teach children, right? That's where the inspiration for the paper was coming from. We then used this idea to do post-training, which I won't explain, very complicated ideas. Again, unless you want to hear from me for the rest of the afternoon, invite me back. That's the main idea. In retrospect, what happened in between time was that we had sequential transduction, which is next token prediction, with fine-tuning using schemata, using chain of thought, is what gave rise to large reasoning machines. So that 10 years, I just gave you a 10-minute, well, actually I ended up spending 15 minutes to explain what happened in the last 10 years. Only these 3 ideas matter. Sequential transduction, which is next token prediction, chain of thought, and post-training. And that's it. That's what's giving rise to all this craziness that's going on in the Valley. Now, why is this important, and why is it related to what we are talking about today on physical AI? I want to explain something. You remember what I said about system compositionality versus now we do it with one model? That the compositionality happens inside of the model now. What's going on is that I think we're at a moment that was very similar to 2015. I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that for 20 years, what we were doing was we were building systems that make sorting better. $500 billion or more was riding on doing sorting better. But what if all that changes? How many of you have seen this video?
Research prototype of Project Astra, and we're going to see how it
One? Okay, let's play it. Can you turn up the sound, please?
Hey, go online and look for a user's manual for a Huffy mountain bike.
I have found a user manual for you. What would you like to know about it?
Okay, cool. Now scroll until you find the section about the brakes.
Sure thing. Looking for that page now.
I think I stripped this screw. Can you go on YouTube and find a video for how to fix that?
Of course. I'm opening YouTube now. This looks like a good video.
Place a rubber band over the head of the screw.
Oh, nice.
Press
Hey,
down firmly.
can you go through my emails with the bike shop and find which size hex nut I need?
Sure. According to the email from Bicycle Habitat, you need a 3/8" hex nut for your sprocket. I've highlighted the correct bin for you.
It seems like I need a spare tension screw. Can you call the nearest bike shop and see what they have in stock?
Yep. Calling them now. I'll get back to you with what they have in stock.
I think my brake pads are wearing down. Can you check the manual again and see if it talks about them anywhere?
According to the manual, if you look on page
Hey.
24,
Do you want to get lunch?
Yeah, give me 5 minutes. Can you finish what you were saying?
as I was saying, if you look on page 24, section 2, you'll see how to replace the brake pads.
Hey, any updates on that call?
Yep, I just got off of the bike shop. They confirmed they have your tension screw in stock. Would you like me to place a pickup order?
Could you show me some examples of dog baskets I could put on my bike?
Sure, I can help you with that. Just give me a moment. Here are some options. I think Zuka would look really great in these.
How many of you think that is a marketing video? That is all fake. At least 10% of the hands went up, right? It's running on my phone. I'm probably the only person, unless there's a trusted tester in the room here somewhere, I'm probably the only one have it running on my phone right now. It's not fake. Every single one of that was real. We showed it at Google I/O and people were able to come to the conference at Google I/O and actually try out this technology. And it's coming to you hopefully very, very soon. It still needs a lot of computation. But in fact, there's the reason why I asked how many people have seen this video is because I actually have a bunch more of these videos. I can show you on these. So for example, here's one where
as a child playing till it got dark outside to make sure
vision impaired person is using this to find out Wi-Fi password from a sign that was posted on the wall, and then it uses that to insert into your Android phone, and then it connects to the Wi-Fi correctly, even though the person can't actually see. And he's a musician. So it's a 4-minute long video, so I don't have the time to play it all. Go on YouTube and find these videos. None of these are fake. These are just to show you what the future looks like. I have a bunch more of these. If I play through all these, it would take 20 minutes. Okay. Here's one that's a homework helper. Completely real, right? Don't tell your kids about this. But take a photo, it understands handwriting, etc., and it just helps you with the homework. I think we have one where the guy is shopping in London, and again, it just goes through and can actually understand what's going on in the world. So why am I explaining all this? I told you about sorting and ranking, right? $500 billion. Do you still think the future of the internet is going to be about sorting after you saw that? How is Google's business going to change? What stocks would you invest in? What you make decisions today based upon the information that you just received will determine whether you'll become a millionaire, right? Well, many of you probably are already millionaires, but I just say tens and maybe even hundreds of millionaires, right? So the future of personalized assistance is clearly not just about sorting. It is about combining these two systems of these very fast pattern recognition things, like your ability to understand the world is pushed into the model. Robots are going to have these capabilities, and in fact, I believe Chelsea might be here to tell you a little bit about some of the work that might be, she might be telling you about some of the work that's going on there. And we have those efforts inside of Google as well called Gemini Robotics. And what is happening is that in the future, on the internet, we're going to increasingly see these sorting capabilities and these reasoning capabilities combined together into a single place, into a single model. So you'll very easily be able to ask, where should I go to dinner tonight? And it will remember that you have 2 kids and a dog. So it should look for a restaurant with a good patio. Right? It will able to reason and rank and show you these different options for you to choose from. This is very clear where we're going in the future. Within the next 6 years or so, this whole transformation is going to happen. By the way, if there's time for Q&A, you can ask me why it's 6 years. Why did I say 6 and not 10 and not 5? Thank you very much.